see such passion and such enthusiasm for the future of this beautiful city. Can I just preface what I'm about to say by saying that they're my comments, they're not the comments of the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce. This is not formal chamber policy. These are ideas that I've had from living in the city for a long time and enjoying one of the most beautiful cities in the world and working out how we're going to get to be back to that place. I think the first thing that I'd like to do is just to put this into perspective. We need to, when we take into account what we're looking at in terms of the future, we need to recognise the size of the issue that we're dealing with. We need to recognise that inside the 4 avenues there are 1,000 buildings that are going to be demolished. And if you just looked at 2 or 3 buildings, 2 or 3 hotels being demolished in the central city, you would say, man, that's a massive undertaking. We've got 1,000 buildings to deal with in the CBD and 300 commercial buildings outside the CBD. So 1,300 buildings in total that look as if they're going to be demolished. We've got 12,000, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 houses in our city that are going to be replaced. That is like rebuilding Ashburton inside Christchurch. And that is a massive task. We have 40,000 houses with moderate damage. Some of you will be victims of that moderate damage. Enormous undertaking to get the city back to where it goes. And we know because when we introduced with government, the government introduced at our recommendation the employment support scheme just after September 6th and again on February the 23rd, we know that 59,000 employees, 15,000 companies and $270 million was expended holding companies up in the 6 weeks after the February 22nd earthquake. That's about 20%, 27% of our total workforce that was on some form of government subsidy. So we should never underestimate the enormity of this issue, the biggest natural disaster in the history of New Zealand, and we have to rebuild our city in that context. The other thing that I'd just like to emphasise is the importance of timeframes and realistic timeframes with respect to the rebuild of the city. We know that Ballantyne's have an objective of getting their store open on October the 29th, and that will involve opening up Cashel Mall, and that will involve placing temporary retail accommodation in that mall. That's a 6-month project to get one street open, and we need to think about that. We need to think that we have 5 to 10 years ahead of us in terms of taking buildings down and recreating downtown Christchurch. It's a 5 to 10 year program. And the important thing about recognising that is the ramifications of that for what happens inside downtown Christchurch and what happens around the rest of our city. Because 5 to 10 years is a long time frame in the history of decision making and what people are going to be doing. I use the word recreation advisedly. We are recreating downtown Christchurch, we're not rebuilding it. We have the opportunity to recreate it. It's an opportunity that has been foisted on us whether we like it or not, and we need to lay down a central city area that we can look forward to the next 150 years in the same way that 150 years ago our forefathers laid down the city that you've been living in to date. And we need to be visionary. I mean, one of the things that I still find extraordinary about our forefathers was that they had the foresight to establish Hagley Park, that enormous piece of green space in the centre of our city. Who would have thought 150 years ago about doing something as radical as that? And we need to be thinking just as radically as we look forward into the future about Christchurch and what it's going to look like. Likely scenario, we're going to have downtown Christchurch supported by villages, nodes of intense commercial activity around the city. It is already happening. You've seen it happening at Addington, at Sheffield Crescent, at the airport, at the Hazelden Centre and Lincoln Road. We are already seeing commercial centres being more dense, more constructed in nodes around the city. And some of that will be permanent. Some of that will be permanent because people will get used to being where they are over 5 years and they will not move back to downtown Christchurch. Some of them can't wait to get back. And it's important that we have a downtown Christchurch that will ensure that we entice them back. And that city, in my opinion, will be low profile. It'll be mainly 4 stories or less. It will be river facing. It will subtend onto Hagley Park, so you'll get an integration between a new green downtown Christchurch and Hagley Park. And it will have various nodes of activity. There will be a lot of people living in downtown Christchurch. There will be high quality, low profile accommodation. There will be good hospitality and entertainment. There will be river facing entertainment, and the river will become a central key to the future of our city. We don't need to turn our backs on the river, we should be facing it. We will have businesses, iconic retail, and we will have good service sector businesses, and we will have nodes of activity in the central city. The legal profession will tend to accumulate and conglomerate around the court systems. The health sector will tend to point towards the hospital, but there's a big movement in health from secondary care, hospital care, into primary care, into community care. And what sort of opportunity have we got in our new downtown Christchurch to ensure that we have a health system that subtends onto the hospital but integrates into the community? And why don't we train doctors in primary care in the community rather than in the hospital when they're going to spend most of the rest of their lives out there in the community? We will have high quality iconic retail, and that will tend to cluster itself around various aspects of downtown Christchurch. And there will be education possibilities. The Polytechnic already has some ideas about how it's going to further encroach into the city. You just heard about English language possibilities. Again, that's a good concept. And there will be research that will subtend onto things like the medical cluster that will involve the University of Canterbury. They're not going to physically relocate, but they will have activity in the central city that is very fundamental to their research and education activities out at Ireland. The dream is to have an iconic city, a worldwide regarded iconic city. If we just go back to doing what we've always done, and if we repair our city in an ad hoc way, and if we just build a tilt slab building or create a car park, we will be cursed by our future generations, who will say to us, you had an opportunity to do something really special here. You had an opportunity to do something radical and you blew it. Well, I'm not going to be part of blowing it. We've got to make sure we get this right. There's been some work done on iconic cities, and it's very clear when you compare ordinary cities with iconic cities. And there's been some studies done on comparing the likes of Leicester with Oxford. And if you look at iconic cities, like attractive, magnetic, sexy cities, they are cities that have higher per capita income. They have cities that have more valuable property. They are cities that are more progressive. They grow faster. And it sounds like common sense. But if you're not determined to ensure that our city is going to be an iconic city in the future, then we're going to lose it. In the past, we've been able to rely on our heritage for a large part of our iconicism. We don't have a lot of that heritage anymore. So what do we have to do to ensure that we recreate Christchurch as an iconic city that is recognised worldwide? And that is really the challenge for you here today. That is the challenge for you, to see what you can do to be part of recreating Christchurch as a worldwide regarded iconic city. I just quote from this report that was done for the Canterbury Development Corporation. It says, because we have the chance to rebuild so much, we have a competitive advantage over lots of other cities that we need to make the most of. If we're too conservative and dull, we will end up just another city. If we are clever and bold, we will be a city not known just as a city that was cruelly struck by 2 major earthquakes, but a city that came roaring back to stamp itself as an iconic world city. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the challenge. The risks. I'm going to give you 5 or 6 key risks that I see. The first risk is capital flight. That means people take their money out of the city and run away. You know, I estimate that the total cost of this earthquake, and I've been sticking my neck out about this for a while, the total cost of this earthquake is $30,000 million. Get used to it, $30,000 million. The Prime Minister is currently around 20,000 million, but every brick we turn, we find 2 broken bricks underneath it. And the problem is $30,000 million. That is a problem, but it's also a huge opportunity. There's going to be massive cash injection into this community. And without getting too technical, let me just say that we've had our balance sheets destroyed, whether it's your house, whether it's your community, whether it's your business, whether it's your city. We've had huge value destruction in this city. What we need to do is use that cash, that $30,000 million, a lot of which is in private sector hands, to flow through and rebuild our balance sheets, whether it's your house, whether it's your community, to recreate equity in this community. And if we don't do that, we've lost a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So the risk of capital flight is really important. The second most and equally important thing is the loss of human capital. You will find, if you research internationally, as I've done a little, that the key essence of fast recovery after disaster is the protection of your existing human capital, of your people, and making sure that your people stay here and have reason to stay here and build the city together. And we have to make sure that we do that. The third risk is that we go back to doing what we always did. We don't want to do that. We want this city to be looking forward and to be doing what needs to be done, not what we always did. The fourth one is delay, and we're already seeing that. We're seeing delays, we're seeing lag times that, in my opinion, are unacceptable. I had a couple of companies come to see me last week, 3,000 members of the Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce. One was laying off bricklayers and the other one was laying off plasterers. This is a city that has to rebuild itself, and we're laying off tradesmen who are fundamentally important, and that's due to lags in getting going. And there are a whole lot of reasons for those lags, not the least of which is getting certainty about the future of our land, and then interfacing that with the insurance industry starting to get going and getting some money back into the system as we recover. And that leads on to the next risk, and that is the land use insurance rebuild interplay that's going on. All the difficulties around. The further we go into this post-earthquake, the more difficult it gets. And we've got to make sure that we cut through some of that difficulty and get on with the rebuild of the central city and our residential sectors.